This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. This week, you'll meet Dahlia Dill. Give us your background of where you grew up and how you got your start in agriculture.
Well, I grew up in Seacoast, New Hampshire area, so close to the Atlantic Ocean, and my parents have always farmed full-time ever since before I was born. So when I was born, my dad was the crops manager for a dairy farm that we lived on, and my mom was starting her journey as a flower farmer. And then it kind of evolved as I grew up. We moved off of that dairy farm and focused on our own beef herd, which my dad had been doing in addition to working for the dairy farm for many years.
Tell us more about your farm stand and what you guys produce on the farm for sale and kind of how your business model looks today.
So you are absolutely right before when you said that the Martins had a customer base here that they had developed over the years that they were farming here. We have neighbors and people in the local community who were used to having this as a place where they could pick up locally produced food. We definitely didn't. That was a great place for us to start, to have those people expecting to maybe find something here. But we've really had to put the work into developing our customer base. So it's not the Martin's customers, they're our customers now. They're coming for our products. They're looking for the things that we're specializing in making, and they're here for the experience of the farm as a whole. So we raise 100% grass-fed beef. We don't bring in any feed from outside. Everything that we feed our 80 cattle is produced here on the farm by us. That's one of our main products, grass-fed beef. And then hay, which I mentioned before, for our own animals and for other people with farms, people with horses, goats, sheep, cows. We sell hay year-round. Our probably next biggest thing is pick your own berries. So we raise naturally raised strawberries and blueberries, and we do pick your own for both of those things, as well as having pre-picked in the farm stand seasonally. So that's a huge draw for us. People love to come and pick berries. It's beautiful here. The views are amazing. Like, there's nothing like eating a warm strawberry off of the vine in the sunshine, like watching Oreo cookie cows graze on the hill. Like, people just love it.
I'm Kayla Lobermeier, and I'm from rural Iowa. We're over in Wellman.
And is that where you were born and raised, or is this where you moved?
No, definitely not born and raised. I was born in Illinois, in the south suburbs of Chicago, Joliet. So kind of the farther suburbs. And growing up around there, they always told us that it was kind of farm country. And now where we live, we're in extremely rural Iowa, like about 2,000 people.
So your flowers are grown organically with sustainability in mind. Tell us why these practices are important to you.
I guess that all started, I ended up watching this documentary on Netflix when we first got started. So before we even grew our first little garden, called Sustainable. And it was something that I hadn't really thought about when it came to, I guess, just how we were eating. And I started looking more into that. And that was really interesting to me, how the choices I was making just by going grocery shopping was affecting farmers, producers, just the world in general. And that was really kind of what first inspired me to look into a more sustainable lifestyle. And then also my son, who, when we first grew that garden, he would have been just a little over a year old. So I wanted to feed him the best foods he could get. And he was just starting to learn how to eat. And the more that I grew and the more I looked into organic practices and kind of had him out in the garden with me, the more I realized, like, he wanted to eat what we were growing because he was helping pick it. So that was just the most important part to me. And the more I research on it, even now, just all the effects that it has within the whole life cycle of the plant and of the insects and pollinators that we're dealing with, I just don't think I'll ever want to stop growing that way. It's kind of hard to describe.
You're talking to an organic farmer, so I know exactly what you're talking about. On this week's episode, you'll meet Maria Stewart. Tell us where you're from and how did you get your start in agriculture?
Well, let's see. We'll start with where I am right now. I'm in West Central New Jersey, and New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the United States. So it's kind of funny that I'm sitting here as a dairy goat farmer. And I hail from Minnesota, outside of the Twin Cities area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And that's where I spent my upbringing. My family had a vegetable farm growing up. So when people ask me, like, what's my agricultural, I have experience, but vegetables are a little different than dairy goats.
What breed of goats are you raising on your farm, and why did you end up choosing the breed?
So we have 22 Alpines, And our intact males and our females are registered with the American Dairy Goat Association. Some of our males are weathered, so they don't have their hands anymore, but they are wonderfully friendly and they're great at eating the forest. So we still are pursuing that forest management side of things, the whole reason we got goats to begin with. And then we have 4 Nigerian dwarfs that we call the little rascals, because obviously they're much smaller than alpines. And they're 4 weathered males that really are critical for eating the lowest shrubbery. And it's so funny because they can walk underneath the alpines. They got this, kind of squeeze a little bit, but they can get low leaves that the alpines are too cool to bend down to eat. Goats are browsers, so they like to eat at face height or even a little bit higher. So we have the 2 sizes of goats that go out to the forest. So we make sure that invasive shrubbery gets eaten, every little leaf, from bottom to top. And my does, right now we're milking 5 does. So we're very small. We are a Farmstead creamery. We have 6 does in total bred for next season. So we'll stay about the same size. And after that, I'll have the opportunity to breed a lot more lady goats. So we'll see what comes in 2022. But I chose alpines in part because of their disposition. They show a lot of their personality, their ears and their facial expressions. And not that other goats don't, but like La Manchas don't have, ears. And so that was, one reason that I wanted the goats that showed their personality. And I also like the different color markings and the kind of the random assortment you get in alpines. Saanens are really good milkers, but they're all white. And so, because we're doing this started as a hobby, now a business, we wanted goats that we, felt would be, engaging and for people to interact with. And definitely the alpines and our 4 Nigerian dwarfs fit the bill completely.
That's very cool. On this week's episode, you'll meet Renee Woods.
I am a first-generation female farmer, and I decided to farm where most people probably wouldn't. I'm on top of a mountain in Colorado. I'm at 10,000 feet, and I raise cattle here and sheep and goats and poultry, and then I'm most well known for my relationship and my passion with my livestock guardian dogs. And me and my farmer's husband, who live in the life up here, the altitude is different. It takes some getting used to, coming from Connecticut. We're definitely not this high up in elevation. So I was out of breath and slightly asthmatic for 6 months when we started. But got to do anything else. And, even realtors told me when we found this property, you're crazy. You can't have a farm here. And I'm one of those people who is just okay, hold my beer. I can do this if you tell me I can't. So I think most farm girls are pretty stubborn like that.
So being in Colorado and being in the mountains makes me instantly think of predators. So tell us about how you keep yourself safe.
Yeah, so we are no strangers to predators. I mean, you name it, we have it. We know we have everything from kind of the nuisance type predators like weasels and raccoons and skunks, all the way to fox and bobcats. And then we also have ringtail cats, which you would probably want to own, Caitlin, because they're super cute. So, and then we also use your cat. And then we also have mountain lions and bears. We don't have grizzly bears here in Colorado, coyotes. And then we do have wolves. I haven't seen any quite this up high on the mountain yet. Colorado just actually passed legislation to do a wolf reintroduction, so we're going to see them very soon. And the way that I keep all livestock protected, including me, is my livestock guardian dogs. So I have a team of 3 livestock guardian dogs that I run here on the farm.
And tell us more about them and how you kind of do raising them and training them to do what they needed to do for you.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely knew when I moved up here that I needed something for predator proofing. And not everybody runs livestock guardian dogs, for their lives. It's important because I understand the importance of living harmoniously with predators. I'm not going to be one of those people who sees a predator and it's I got to shoot it because it's on my land, or I have to shoot up in the air and scare it off. I knew I didn't want to be that type of rancher, and most aren't, because all of us are, we love animals. That's why we do this. So I knew that I wanted to bring in something that would deter the predators from deciding that my farm was a really good place to hang out around, but then also that I didn't have to use extreme force. So I knew livestock guardian dogs were the way to go. And actually, before I even brought home my first chicken, I started doing research on livestock guardian dogs. and the different breeds. I started researching breeds around me because it's very important that I was from a breeder that was close by that could be a mentor for me, because I was brand new. And I even remember when I started, I was so worried I was going to mess up Caitlin. You know, you hear this big responsibility of bringing home this little puppy that you have to protect your entire farm. I just felt so much pressure. And I knew with my background in dogs and also my background in training, you know, at the aquarium, like with the belugas, and I did occasionally work with like the Steller sea lions there, that training was my thing.
Renee Clark is a third-generation dairy farmer in Southwest Wisconsin.
Yeah, so my name is Renee, and I am a third-generation dairy farmer. I live in Southwest Wisconsin. I farm with my husband and then 7. So my brother and sister-in-law are part owners, my parents, my aunt and uncle, and then my cousin as well. And we milk about 2,000 cows. And my personal job every morning, I feed the cows. So when I said I listen to a lot of podcasts, I spend 5 hours, the first 5 hours of my day, every day, in a loader, front end loader, in the feed up for the cows, listening to podcasts like this one. And I have 3 little girls, ages 8, 5, and 4. So they spend, especially this year with COVID, a lot of time on the farm. Yeah, and I love running and my Dalmatian Bentley and coffee too, like you said.
So many things to love and to break down here. Things. So yes. Tell us more about the breed of cattle that you guys are milking. Brown Swiss isn't overly popular, I would think. You see a lot of Holstein farmers in Wisconsin, but why did you guys go with Brown Swiss?
Well, so actually, I had said the Brown Swiss thing. We only have a handful of Brown Swiss. We have really? the majority. Yeah. But the Brown Swiss are easy for the kids to pick out because they're different colored than the rest of the cows. We mainly have Holstein, and we have red and white Holsteins as well. But we do a lot of crossbreeding with beef for some of our cows. So a lot of our calves we've been doing like a Charolais cross. So are these really pretty, like, gray. They're super cute. But the Brown Swiss in the barn, there's about 5 that are cows, baby calves, Brown Swiss. And my oldest daughter, she has named them all. And the current favorite her name is Gingerbread House. And then she had a baby she named her Crumbles. When a gingerbread house falls apart, it crumbles.
Like, so cute.
You're really good at naming calves.
Right.
But so whenever we go in there and they're always like, can we name a calf? And it's like, sure. So there's like 4 names, Sparkles or something. But
that's so sweet. Well, and it's so fun, like, to be bringing up the next generation on the same farm that you grew up on. So tell us more about your daughters and what they love the most about the farm and look forward to as they grow older on the farm.
Yeah, it is interesting to raise your kids on the farm you grew up on. Granted, how the farm looks today is a lot different than when I was a kid. Like, when I was a kid, my job was to feed calves, like, after school and stuff, and we had a max of 14 calves. We could have 14 calves born in one day now. So things are a lot different. And when I was right outside of our house, and now we live on the farm, but it's 2 miles from our milking barn. So it's definitely interesting. It's very interesting. I am the youngest of 4 kids. And the other 3, I have 3 older brothers. So I only grew up with boys. And now I have 3 girls. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know this dynamic. I never had a sister. I don't know what's happening.
You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast.
Well, my name is Bridget Jones, and I live in Crownsville, Maryland, about 20 minutes outside of Annapolis. We're real close to Annapolis, but we're kind of sandwiched in between Baltimore and DC, for those of you that aren't familiar with, Maryland geography. So that would be Maryland in the United States. And I actually married a farmer. So I did not grow up on a farm. I married into the family, and they have been on this farm for my husband's the fourth generation. And we have him and his siblings. They have children. We have two, and then I have nieces on the farm as well. So they will be the fifth generation. And our farm was more of an industrial farm. We were doing tobacco back in the, 50s and 60s. And then by the 80s, it was mostly, our fields were mostly growing like corn and soybeans and the like. And we also grew produce for some of the local grocers in the area. And we recently kind of took things over a little bit. Our farm is about 80 acres now. Back when we were an industrial farm, it was about 300 acres. So you can see the change. We're a little bit smaller, a lot of it smaller, I should say, and more of a family kind of, I kind of call it a homestead. I know 80 acres sounds a lot to somebody that doesn't have a farm, but in farm terms, that's a little smaller. So we started Wildberry Farm and Market about a year ago now in 2019. And this is a way for us to kind of diversify our farming operations, bring us into the, just to the modern world, and offer a little bit more on our farm than just standard farming practices.
Tell us more about Wildberry Farm and Market. What are you guys doing on your farm now?
Well, we have a few different avenues, I guess I should call them. It kind of started off with, I have a lot of friends in the creative scene in Annapolis, and I know a lot of photographers. So the first thing that we talked to was a few photographer friends, and we were like, hey, would you ever be interested in renting the farm? We have a couple fields, that would be great for photography. And if you want to come check it out, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And they did, and they were really into it. And so we started off offering it up to photographers to rent, just certain areas of the farm for photography. And then I kind of had this, idea that I would sell our eggs and our produce at a roadside stand. And, you have these ideas, and then it's like sometimes they just go to a place you didn't expect it to, which is the coolest part about the farm for me. Here I thought I was going to just be sitting by the side of the road with my trailer full of produce and eggs. And instead it turned into, we pushed back our market opening weekend, and it was pushed back from March to June. And I just said to a few friends in the wedding industry in the area, why don't you just come out? There's no weddings right now. Just come out for free. We're not going to charge you. It'll just be a fun morning, and, we'll just sell our stuff, together. And it turned into vendors asking to come back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Wasylik, and I am a second-generation farmer at our farm, Chatsworth Farm, which is located 2.5 hours east of Edmonton, near Vermilion. And my family has a mixed farm, so we have cattle, sheep. I have a ever-expanding flock of poultry. We are cat farmers, and we have our livestock guardian dog, Lizzie. And we run about 500 total head of cattle, mostly commercial. And then my brothers have a smaller herd of purebred Black Angus and Simmentals. And we do a lot of farm gate sales. We don't do any farmers markets at the moment, but have been quite busy with just selling from our backyard and making deliveries to Vermilion as well as to Edmonton.
Let's just go back to 2020. We're in 2021 now. It is past. We are the future is bright. Walk us through 2020 and the adjustments that were made to excel your family's farm and the events that you guys hosted or tried to host in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was definitely the year where events were not. That was 2020. But for the farm, we hosted our first couple of events, including Open Farm Days in August. So Open Farm Days is a province-wide initiative started by Alberta Agriculture to get rural and urbanites out to farms, whether they're only a 5-minute drive or maybe a couple-hour drive, to get everyone exposed to agriculture in the province. And the agriculture can be so diverse, from apiaries to a grain farm to a beef farm to an urban farm. So the whole goal is to just get people out, get them learning, get them understanding how food is grown and raised. So we took part in 2020 for our first time, and it was absolutely incredible. We had 151 people attend, and so there were the specific provincial guidelines that we had to adhere to for COVID, but then we took those guidelines and put more into place just for our farm, and just to make it easier to get everyone in the group to hear what we're talking about and to see everything that's happening. So we had groups of 30 for each hour, and we walked them around the farm. We toured the chickens. We had chicks that I had hatched out specifically for Open Farm Days. So I counted back 21 days, and the day before Open Farm Days, pretty much all of them hatched. So I had less than day-old baby chicks on hand for all the kids and the adults to hold and touch. We checked out the cattle. They fed the horse. We walked them around our broiler chickens and our meat turkeys. So gave everyone an immersive experience of how our working farm operates. And then they got to come back. We had a little pop-up market. So we had our farm products, and then we invited a local cheesery to be set up as well. So they had their cheeses on hand, and we had the most perfect weather. And I had a few of my friends from the city who I had worked with previously at Northlands for all of our events. So they came down. So it was such a fantastic day, and I'm so glad we were able to host it. And we are looking forward to planning it again this year.
That's awesome. This week, you'll meet Nicole Poburan.
As you said, my name is Nicole, and I grew up a farm kid. We lived up in a small place called Rocky Lane, which is about 100 kilometers West Territories border. And I was in B4H for 8 years, I believe, and in between there, some pony club and some horse 4-H. So I've had a lot of experience with farm life. And then I went away to school and left the farm. And it wasn't until the birth of my son. He had a lot of belly issues. We just couldn't get to the roof. And I started a nutrition diploma to try and just figure out a way of how to help him out. And during that, it really emphasized a lot of knowing where your food comes from. And I took it one step further and thought, well, how about I just be the person who makes where the food comes from? So luckily, my husband is super supportive of sometimes my very random dreams. And we bought our little acreage. And we started off with 2 Nigerian dwarf milk goats and a little handful of chickens. And that's kind of where we started.
Let's talk about Nigerian dwarf goats. Tell us all about them. Why did you decide 7 years ago that this was going to be the goat for you?
So when we were doing our research, I wanted something that the property or the person who owned the house before we did, they bred dogs. So all the fences were about like 4 foot high, trenched in. She bred boxers. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I know what kind of fencing setups that I have to deal with. So I need something that's on the smaller side because like we just bought the property. So redoing all the fences was not a viable option. And because I knew that I was going to be feeding the milk to my tiny human, I needed to have something that was not really goaty tasting. I'm kind of like a milk snob. I think it's because I was allergic to milk when I was a little kid, but I wanted something that was super meaty. They have the highest butterfat content of all the goat breeds, and they're really efficient with their feed intake. So because they're smaller statured, they don't take in as much feed, but you still get like a substantial amount of milk. So you get about 4 cups usually off of our girls while they're still feeding anywhere from twins to triplets. So it's still like a good amount of milk, and because it's thick and high butterfat, it makes really nice yogurt. So that was what we mainly started with feeding him, was like the milk itself, but also making yogurt, which worked out really well. So that's what kind of steered us to Nigerians, and the fact that they bred year round. So because we do work both off the farm, I needed to have something that we could kind of play around with, because at first we like to have our summer vacations. So I wanted to be breeding not during time so that we could be home for kidding season, but be able to adventure around in the summertime. And they're really personable. They're pretty chill little animals. So I needed something that would be safe with the kids, because I don't really want to have to be like always knowing exactly where they are when they're out in the yard, and the fears of having something step on them.
My name's Cathy Payne. My other name is Cathy R. Payne. I'm currently in Athens, Georgia. I've grew up around the Midwest. I was in Duluth, Minnesota, not too far from the Canadian border when I was growing up, but I spent all my life in suburban kind of settings. And do you want the long introduction or the short one?
You give us as much as you want, Cathy.
Okay. So what I am today is I'm an author of a book, but I went through a homesteading journey. So over the years, I've lived everywhere, and I taught school for 33 years, and I retired, started a homestead, and did that for 8 years, and really emphasized heritage livestock breeds and nutrient-dense foods. And then I moved back to the Athens area near family and am in suburbia. But I guess an important detail is I did not start homesteading until I was 57 years old. So a lot of people are encouraged by that. They think, I'm 35 years old and I've never farmed, so it's too late for me. But it's never too late. So whatever you want to do, just get out there and do it. So that's my short story.
That's great. For the listeners who may be unfamiliar with the Guinea hog breed, can you describe some of their key characteristics?
Yes, I can. They are a small breed. So when I say small, there are some lines that can reach maybe 150 to 250 pounds at maturity, but there are others that will grow to 350 or 400 pounds. But when you think of a standard pig, those will get to be 900, 1,200 pounds. So it's much smaller than a standard pig. And the typical thinking is that you take, if you were just getting a feeder pig, that you'd take a feeder pig at 8 weeks and grow it out and feed it until it was 6 months old. And at that point, you'd have 200 to 250 pound animal. You'd go home with 150 pounds of meat after butchering. That's not what you're going to get with the guinea hog. But you might grow the guinea hog out for 9 months or 12 months instead of 6 months, and then get half the amount of meat. But for a homesteader, if you have an animal that's having 10 babies twice a year and growing them out and getting 50 pounds of meat from each one, if you were just doing it for the meat, that's a lot of meat. That's going to take up a lot of freezer space, even if you just have 2 pigs. So it is not always a drawback to have a smaller animal to butcher and a smaller space to store your food. By having the solid black color, they do well in hot weather, direct sunshine. But basically, they're a very easy to manage, docile animal.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kylie Bartman. My husband and I are owner-operator of a farm in central Alberta. We're in Cameron County, Alberta. We're Christian farmers. So our grandparents were farmers. We had some aunt and uncles that were farmers, but our parents did not farm. We lived in a small town in Alberta, and had some farming friends. So we did not grow up around agriculture. We started a farm about 3 years ago. We wanted to connect our family back with nature and with our food. And so we moved out to a beautiful piece of land just outside of town, and we started with chickens. So fast forward 3 years, and we now raise cattle, pigs, sheep, and chicken. On our farm, we do direct-to-consumer meat sales. So we sell everything directly to our consumer shop, as well as we have started our on-farm store. And so that's a little bit about the farm. I'm a pharmacist by day and a farmer the rest of the time. So night and weekends are consumed by our farm. We really believe in ecosystem, and we collaborate with other local farms and producers and artisans to share the local food scene. And we offer that food and goods in our online and our in-store shop to consumers, to their farmer, and to their food. So we share our journey on social media and really try to connect people in that way.
What made you decide that you direct market your products versus other avenues?
Yeah, we started off really small, starting off with just a couple pigs, and then the next batch we got was about 10. We looked a little bit into auction marts and sort of what that looked like, and it kind of scared us. We didn't really know what that sort of whole thing was all about. So, we just really started off immediately into the direct marketing thing, and, we kind of numbers, and we were like, okay, if we're only finishing, 20 pigs this year, what does that look like for our pocketbook? And, it just didn't make any sense at all to do sort of, your traditional stuff to a market and that sort of thing, because we'd barely be able to cover the costs of any infrastructure we'd be putting in and things like that. So direct to consumer really just made sense for our operation.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.